The city seemed to hold its breath. From the narrow slit of her window, Sansa watched the last light slide from the apricot sky into a bruise-colored dusk, and with it the heat went crawling away into cracks, leaving the stones clammy and the air thin as linen. The bay was a black sheet beneath, pricked with dull sparks from the anchored ships and the lumbering river barges. On the water the wind whispered without touching her face, a sound as remote as a memory. The Red Keep never truly slept, yet there were hours when even the cats lay quiet and the guardsmen muttered their complaints under their breath rather than shout them. Hours when doors that should be locked were merely closed, and eyes that should be keen grew lidded. Sansa had learned that since the bells began tolling for the king who no longer breathed, she did not cry now. She had done enough of that in the afternoon, in useless hiccuping bursts that left her throat raw and made Jane clutch at her sleeve and wail louder still. Jane was not here. Someone had come and taken Jane away before the sunset. The mousy-haired woman who kept the linens for the Hand's Tower, with 2 Lannister men-at-arms who never looked at Sansa directly when she asked where they were going, only told her gently to wait, sweetling, best wait, and they would bring Jane back once the Queen had done with her. After they left, even the room's shadows had felt strange, furniture receding into unfamiliar angles, as though her chamber had been exchanged for one nearly like it but not quite. Ned, she thought, and then it became father in her head because it hurt less that way, though the hurt was only made quieter, not smaller. She had seen him in the throne room, had seen men she had known in passing as good and true, Ser Rabar of the Vale with the weather-browned face and kind eyes, Ser Horace Redwine whose hair fell like polished chestnut wood, all of them looking different once swords were bared. She had watched the gold cloaks swing high, as if they were dancers and the floor their stage, and when their weight fell it had fallen on her father's men. The sound was worst. Iron on bone, the thick wet thud of a man pitched off balance into another. Littlefinger had been there, smiling the way men smiled in a sept when the candles were bright and the stones clean, and the Queen had looked everywhere at once and not at Sansa at all. She pressed her hands to the chill sill and breathed slow through her nose. Her chamber smelled of tallow, and the faded rosewater they had used to wash her hair that morning, and the salt coming up from the water, and under it all a brittle, dusty scent that belonged to the stone itself. They had allowed her a candle, 2, 3. The flame quivered in each as if it could hear her heartbeat. A guard had been set at the end of the corridor. She had heard the drag of a spear but against the floorboards as he turned. He had coughed twice, a dry, patient sound. "If I ask to see the Queen, she will see me," Sansa told herself. "If I ask to see Joffrey, surely he will come." She held to the name of him as she might hold to a silky ribbon, something bright against the dark. Joffrey would want to see her. He had always come to her when he found an excuse. When she pictured his face, its corners softened of their own accord. Her memory was good at smoothing hard edges. Tomorrow, she would go to the Queen and say the words about mercy that Septa Mordain had taught her, and then Joff would. She swallowed. The thought turned and showed another face. Tomorrow might have a jagged mouth. There was a rap at her door. Not a knuckle, but wood on wood, soft and cautious as a mouse's foot. The spear but scraped outside. "Who's there?" Sansa called, and when her voice came it was almost steady. A woman's voice answered, low. "My lady, forgive me. The laundresses were late. I have your night shift." Sansa looked down at herself, at the pale green of her gown with the little seed pearls stitched in a willow pattern. It was the wrong thing to sleep in, but she was not cold, and there was no comfort in changing clothes when the world below her window had become so strange. Still, she went and turned the latch and opened the door, and when the woman slipped in, Sansa only recognized the two by the smell before she recognized them by sight. Lye and lavender, the scents of the Queen's swing where sheets and small clothes were boiled and beaten and wrung. The woman held a folded bundle of linen. Behind her came a second figure burdened with another bundle, head bowed, shoulders narrow. Sansa thought a girl, a small one. The guard's heavy step moved away, down the corridor. There was another door opening at the corner. "My thanks," Sansa said because it was what one said, and the woman dipped her head, and in dipping it, her hood swung back a little and skipped from the lamplight to shadow and back, and the face turned and was a face Sansa knew well from the Gilded Days, one she had never expected to see under a laundress hood. Lord Renly, she breathed. The man behind him, the small figure, set his bundle down with care and straightened and became, with a tilt and a careless smile and an unhood glance, Ser Loras Tyrell. The smile died quickly. He put a finger to his lips. Renly closed the door in a smooth motion and through the bolt he could reach without looking. His hair was damp at the edges. Rain had begun while Sansa stared, a whisper on the window, and a ribbon of water had run off his hood and caught at the line of his jaw. "My lady," Renly said. His eyes were the color of old green bottles in shadow. The cloth bundle in his arms was heavier than linen. He set it upon her bed and opened it. "There is no time for courtesies tonight." Sansa's mouth moved. She could not tell whether she was glad to see him or ashamed that he found her in a gown tricked with pearls, candles all alight as if she expected callers. Why? There is no why that will comfort you," Renly said gently. He reached and pinched out one candle, then another, leaving only the lamp by the door. "The queen scents her hounds with dusk, not dawn. By morning they will be everywhere that is yours. Cersei will not leave you to your own mind, Sansa. You must come with us now if you would go at all." "Go," she said, and in saying it tasted the bitter iron of the word. "Where? No, why me? I'm to be the queen. Prince Joffrey would never." "He will do as his mother instructs him," Loras murmured. His voice, even when whispered, had a bright edge. It put her in mind of a sword that had been polished with oil until you could see your face in it. "And tomorrow's instruction will be that you are to write letters. To the north. Letters that say what the queen wishes your brother to hear. Letters that plead for peace built of your father's bones." It was indecent to speak so, like pulling back sheet linen to show a wound. Sansa stepped away from them both and found herself against the bedpost. She could feel the carved leaves beneath her fingers where a woodcarver had made them curl long ago. "You can't know that." Renly stood very still. He had not stepped farther into the room than he must, and the hood had slipped back. He was bareheaded now, his dark hair a little ruffled as if a lover had run fingers through it. "I know the queen," he said softly, "and I have watched the gold cloaks turn their cloaks. I know the smell of fear when it grows in a man. It will grow fastest in those who serve you." He indicated the bundle with a nod. "Put this on. The sooner we are in the dark, the better." Sansa looked down. The bundle was a coarse, dark gown, hem-stained as if it had already known a floor rubbed with ash. On top of it lay a ragged cloak with a patched hood. She stared at them stupidly, as if they might speak for themselves. She could not be wearing that cloak, but she did not say so aloud. Ned would have told her to be brave. Arya would have snatched the cloak before the sentence was finished. "Turn your hair up," Loras said, softer now, as if he had guessed where her thoughts had run and chose to place his words on either side of them. A fencing move to herd her toward the right opening. "Put it all away beneath the hood. If we are stopped, no one but a love-struck boy will look twice at your cheeks." The corner of his mouth twitched, some memory he kept for himself. His eyes moved past her once, registering and rejecting without effort the melancholy shapes of dresses in the press and the little jar of perfume that Joffrey had given her last week, before everything had gone sour. "We will meet 3 men between here and the postern. Speak to none of them. Walk as if your water's about to boil over." "I can't go," she heard herself say. "Jane, have you seen Jane? She's just gone out with. She's only—" The words turned to fog. She swallowed hard. "I don't know where Arya is." Renly's mouth opened and closed minimally, a flicker of thought that made itself seen upon his face and then retired. "We have men looking for your sister," he said, each syllable careful as a footfall on ice. "But not here, not now. Not with you. There is not a path in this keep I would not find choked with Lannister spears by dawn. We are enough and too many." Sansa found the laces at the back of her gown with fumbling fingers. Loras, gaze politely averted, went to the door to listen. Renly turned his back like a brother would. The laces would not come for her, the knot seized like a frightened hand. "Septa Mordain always," she bit the rest. Septa Mordain was elsewhere, and Sansa did not know where. Tears came, and she ground them back between jaw and tongue until she tasted salt. Lord Renly. He turned at once when she said his name, came back without hurry and set his large hands to the knot, unpicking it so deftly that if she had closed her eyes she could have pretended it was a maidservant's fingers, dry and plain and gossiping under their breath. He said nothing while he worked. There were no jokes, no chiding. When the gown fell, she stepped out of it and into the brown one. It scratched her skin. She drew the cord tight and put her arms into the patched cloak and pushed her hair up and felt the weight of it drag through her fingers. The hood smelled faintly, indefinably, of smoke. Her hands shook and she pressed them still against her sides until they learned obedience. Loras glanced back, lifted an eyebrow, and in that light became once more the bright knight from the tourney, the one whose lance had touched and did not bruise. "You have a good face for the night," he said lightly. "Hide the light of it for now." He took up the second bundle and shook it once. Out fell 2 rolled pieces of parchment and a dagger. Sansa stared at the dagger as if it were a snake. He tucked it into his belt and slid one parchment into Renly's hand, the other up his own sleeve. "For the last gate," he told Renly, and then looked to Sansa. "And if you should speak, say nothing but sir, and look down." The door's bolt slid back. The lamplight seemed suddenly too bright. Renly blew it out, and for a heartbeat Sansa's vision was all spangles where the flame had been. Then the corridor's dimness came into focus, the slow breathing of torches set far from one another, the smell of the keep's gut, sweat, oil, old wood rubbed with 1,000 hands. The guard who had coughed earlier was slumped on the bench with his spear under his arm and his forehead against the wall. He was not asleep. Not quite. He moved when Renly closed the door behind them and made the smallest grunting question. Renly shifted the laundress bundle under his arm and grunted back something that could have been either answer to any question. The guard let it pass through him like weak beer. Loras was already walking. Sansa stepped after him. It should have been longer, the passage to the Queenswing. In daytime, with light falling through high carved windows and the chatter of women and perfume to drown the salt and the dry rot, it had always been a walk for a lady. Her feet would barely have touched the floor, and doors seemed to sort themselves for her convenience, opening under her glance. Now even the air seemed to resist her, as though it suspected what she intended and tried to slow her. Her steps sounded wrong to her ears, too heavy, too purposeful. She tried to make the pad of them small. She tried to think about boiling pans and not about what lay between here and the river gate. 2 turns, a stretch where the walls pressed in and the ceiling lowered, a door with ironwork like vines. The women's gallery smelled of stale incense. Down the stair there was a corridor where the stones had sunk and risen in waves under 10,000 footfalls. They crossed it and came among the servants, into that other city within the walls where faces were half known and clothes were drab and always moving. Loras took a bucket from a doorway without breaking stride and carried it in the hand that did not touch his sword. Renly stooped once to pick up a linen cloth that someone had let fall. He flung it over his shoulder as if that had been his intention from the start. Sansa watched his grace become clumsiness. A courtier's lightness turned to a servant's careful stoop. She kept her head down and saw everything. Ankles peeping from under gowns, a boy with a bitten lip, the shine of a ladle. She thought, absurdly, that she would write this for Arya, that she would tell the story of it, how she had gone walking in the red keep like a ghost raised from a kitchen fire. The thought buoyed and broke as quickly as a bubble. They were stopped at the first turn by a man in a boiled leather jerkin with a lion's head stamped upon it. His beard was a poor thin thing. His eyes darted. "You there," he said, shaping the air into suspicion. "Where from?" "The Queenswing," Loras said, the single word pitched just above humble. He held up the empty bucket and made a small sour face. "Washhouse has run out of lye." The guard's glance passed over Sansa and did not stick. It lit upon Renly's face and, for a heartbeat, flared. The man knew that face. Renly lifted his chin a little and the hood's shadow fell different across his mouth. He set the bundle of linen down and rummaged in it until he found the flask he had tucked between wrappers and threadbare shirts. Thin tin, dented common. He shook it, made it rattle, and held it out. "If you have a mind to stand by the Lady Lannister's doors while her maids complain," he said comfortably, almost as if he were speaking to a friend in a hall after supper, "you might as well do it with a wet throat, sir." The word sir, offered like a sweet after meat, did the work. The guard grinned despite himself, snatched the flask, took a fierce swallow, coughed, and waved them past. "Hurry, then," he said. "They said not to leave a hand idle." Walking again, they had the length of a breath to glance at one another. Renly did not smile, only quickened his step. Loras's knuckles were white on the bucket's handle. Sansa wanted to take his hand, only to feel another living thing. She tucked her fingers into her sleeves and kept walking. All the while, beyond the walls, the sea kept whispering. It grew louder as they descended. In the passages lower and wider, the night fog made a skin upon the air like cool breath. Her cheeks caught dew. The smell of fish came briefly from a door ajar where a maidservant was gnawing a cold pie, then vanished beneath the strong tar smell that told her they were near the stables and the ferry court. She had never liked that smell until now. It meant ships. It meant a way. They met the second man at the arch to the ferry court. He was heavy and bored, a gold cloak worn too loose on his shoulders. "Late," he said without malignance, as if announcing weather. "Orders say none out after." "Orders say the same each night, friend," Renly answered, as if the man had remarked on the size of the moon. His hood was pushed back just enough to give the hint of a jawline that any woman in the keep could have named. Renly held up the parchment Loras had slipped to him. The seal was smear-black in this light, but the stamp of a crowned stag showed clear. "If the Queen's mind has altered itself since the dusk, you and I shall answer to her together." The man did not dare look too long at the seal. People were passing behind them. Two boys with a plank between them, a cleric in gray with his sandals worn to strings, a girl leading a goat that bleated once, mournfully. He was a gate, and the stream wanted to flow. He looked instead at Loras's bucket, then at Sansa's hood, where a curl had escaped to cling to her cheek. She felt his gaze like heat and wished she knew how to be made of stone. She ducked her head farther. Renly's presence filled the space, an ease that said this is all as it should be. "Right, then," the gold cloak muttered and stood aside. The ferry court was open to the sky, a slice of night between roofs. Torches guttered and hissed in iron rings, throwing small wild ovals of light upon the wet cobbles. The river gate stood ahead, its iron teeth raised, the winch at rest. Beyond it, in the slice of Blackwater Bay visible, a line of low lanterns bobbed like a procession of glowworms along the decks of boats. Men shouted among themselves in shanty cadence, the words indistinct. A gull laughed once and was silent. The third man waited by the gate itself, wrapped in a cloak too fine for a watchman, too plain for a lord. His hair was thin. He turned when Renly approached and, in turning, bent his tall body at a little angle that was not quite deference. "My lord," he said, and his voice was fluid. "You are later than I like, but the tide serves us, at least. Your vessel is ready." "I will remember to be earlier tomorrow," Renly returned, and his mouth almost smiled. "Sing me a sweeter song, Varys." Varys, Sansa thought, and in thinking it, trembled. The eunuch's eyes brushed her like a butterfly's wing and moved off, never fastening. But she knew he had seen everything that could be seen in so small a face. "Nothing sweeter tonight," Varys said. "Only speed. The Queen's net is wide, and she drew it early. I have cut some of the knots, but there will be knots." He gestured with his long fingers. "This way." They went quickly then. Varys moved like water through the press of bodies and rope coils and stacks of crates that smelled of oranges and damp leather. Sailors glanced at him and then away like men glancing at a wind they cannot see. Sansa did not look back. She felt the mass of the keep behind her all the same, the weight of it pressing at her, the yards of old stone and the galleries and the places she had imagined herself walking through for years to come, each now no more than a pocket of shadow left behind. Joffrey is in there, she thought, like a child feeling the absence of a toy. Father is in there. Arya is... She did not finish that either. If she did, she would stop. Down the steps to the quayside, where the water lapped with little greedy sounds at the weed-slicked stone. A skiff bumped the lower step, its hull a darkness on darkness. A man leaned in it with both hands on a pole. His beard was the gray of ships' rope soaked long in sea. Varys touched his shoulder, and the man looked up and blew out a breath that seemed to deflate his whole chest. "This is the girl?" he asked, not unkindly and not kindly either. Sansa had never seen eyes that were more like pebbles. He glanced at Renly. "And you, lordling, I've had otter cargo." "Then we will not be remembered," Renly said, and stepped down with the ease of a man who had often done so. Loras came after him. Sansa found her foot and felt it slip and found it again, and then the S. Kif accepted her with a tenderness that surprised her, its slight wallow a kind of embrace. Varys did not come with them. He stood where the steps showed his feet and lifted one hand. A blessing, perhaps, or a benediction for those already half-cast from the net he had described. "Swift," he said, and the gray-bearded oarsmen snorted and pushed off. The water took them, and a space opened between the quay and the skiff. Sansa watched the stone edge recede and felt, unexpectedly, a quick pain in her breast like the first breath taken after drowning. She swallowed the sound of it, turned it into the smallest sigh. Her hands were very cold. She tucked them under her cloak against her ribs. They did not speak. The oarsmen stroked them out into the dark, near enough to the piled shadow of ships that she could have touched a hull had she reached up, away from the brighter lanes where lanterns bobbed and small talk were offered and refused. The smell of pitch thickened. A rat skittered across a rope and vanished. The Red Keep was behind them now, a black cliff with a few windows sewn across it like embers in ash. The sky above was a dark blue pelt. The stars pricked into it vividly, as if someone had pushed pins from the other side. She could have counted them if her mind had allowed stillness. "Do not be afraid," Renly said at last, so soft that the words were more breath than sound. "I'm not," Sansa lied, and then thought of how Arya would have scowled at her for it. "I mean, I am, but I'm going." She swallowed. "Will we where?" "To a ship that rides now in the mouth of the bay," Renly said. She could see only the shape of him. His face was a color mixed from night and a sliver of lantern from some distance. A trading vessel out of the arbor, with a hold full of casks that made the gatemen friendly, and deckmen who know when to look and when not to. "When the tide turns, we will slip free of the mouth and swing south. If the wind is just and the gods kind, by dawn we shall be beyond the sweep of their fastest oared galleys, and the Blackwater will be a line in the air behind us. From there—" He did not complete the sentence. "From there," Loras said instead, and she could hear his smile briefly in the two words. "There will be all the honeyed bread you can stomach and a bed that does not slide beneath you." He shifted. The skiff rocked minutely, and Sansa's stomach rocked with it. "And gardens again if you like the smell of things that grow toward the sun. Highgarden knows how to be gentle when gentleness is needed." "Highgarden," Sansa repeated, letting the word sit on her tongue like a sweet. She had read of it often, of its soft river and its pavilions and the way the wickerwork smelled of cut reeds. A part of her balked. If she was to be queen, shouldn't her path be to the Red Keep? Not away? But the queen who lived there now was not the queen she had shaped in her girlhood thoughts. And the true queens she recalled, good Queen Alysanne, the women in the songs whose gentleness was a power, had been kind and strong, and did not pull the wings from flies to hear the sound. She thought of Cersei's mouth again, the way it pinched when it smiled. "Will I be safe there?" Renly made a small movement, not quite a shrug. "Safer than here," he answered, which could have been honesty or humility or both. "Your safety will have a sharper edge if we are swift. And if those who care for you know where to find you." Robb, she thought, mother, even Uncle Edmure, who laughed too loudly and tipped wine sometimes, would be loud with his sword as well, she believed, if any called him to it for her sake. Her throat tightened. "My father!" Renly's hand brushed her sleeve. It was a shock, not because of the touch but because of its gentleness. He did not hold her, did not try to still her. He simply reassured her of his shape in the dark. "We do not abandon him," he said. "But the thing we can do for him now is not here." He paused. "He would ask me to keep you from the queen." Sansa stared at the place where the water touched the skiff side and made a little seam of brighter black. She tried to imagine father saying those words. He would not have spent extra breath on them. That steadied her more than any oath could have. She nodded to no one, to herself, and adjusted her cloak. The skiff slid into shadow that was thicker and smelled sharply of tar. A bulk rose on their right hand. No longer the dead side of a tied ship, but something alive. Something breathing in creaks and the soft, impatient grate of rope upon wood. Lantern light banked behind waxed leather. A voice above them said a word like a sigh. The oarsmen angled them broadside and made fast. Hands reached down like the long bones of a whale's ribs and took them up, one by one, and the deck under Sansa's sawls had a memory of sun in it even at night, a heat stored and released. The deck pitched like the slow breathing of some great animal at rest. "Welcome," said a voice with a gentle slur to it. A man approached with a lantern cupped in one hand. The light made a ring upon the boards and their feet stood in it. His beard was neatly clipped, salted brown. A scarf was tied about his head. "You bring me trouble, my lords." "We bring you coin," Loras returned with a brightness that did not hide the iron underneath. "And a name to set on your tongue if you like the taste of future favor better than present fear." He gestured to Sansa. "Lady." Sansa lifted her face because it would have been shameful not to. The man's eyes measured without rudeness. He made something that was not quite a bow and not quite a nod. "My lady," he said, and his voice softened, as if it had touched something old in him. "We will keep a neat deck for you. No sailors talk where it might give offense." "I have 2 ears," Sansa said, surprising herself, and he smiled. It made a map of wrinkles around his eyes. "So you do." "I am Beldegar," he said. "This ship is the honeyed kiss, and tonight she kisses no one we do not intend. Come, then, below. Keep to the dark o' the rail where the lanterns do not fancy you." They went where he showed. The ship's deck trembled faintly beneath their feet, a nervousness that did not belong to men but to thinking of wind. Men lay wrapped in cloaks between coils of rope, their faces turned to darkness. Eyes opened and closed as they passed, uncurious. The smell was a layered thing. Oak, brine, a sweetness from the cargo beneath them that was not flowers but made Sansa think of summer all the same. A cat stepped out from behind a barrel and let its tail wrap around Loras's boot. He paused to scratch it without thinking, and Sansa loved him for it for a moment. Below, in the small captain's cabin, a lantern burned low and steady, its flame as centered as a prayer. The walls were close, the table neatly stacked with folded charts and 2 apples gone waxy from keeping. Beldegar set the lantern on a shelf and shut the door, and the sounds of the bay softened into a hush against the boards. He sat because it was his place to sit, and Renly took the bulkhead opposite, and Loras leaned in the corner with his helm on his hip. Sansa stood because she did not know what else to do with her limbs. "Sire," she said to Renly. The word felt different now than it had when she'd first used it earlier that night. "Why are you doing this for me?" Renly thought a little longer than courtesy required. When he answered, he kept his voice low, but there was no lilt to it. "Because I asked your father to do something he would not," he said. "This afternoon. I asked him to make a choice that would have broken oaths he is too much himself to break. He answered me with steel in his eyes where other men show pride, and I left him there with his steel and his eyes and came away. I have been ashamed of that all evening." He glanced to Loras, to Beldegar, and back, and allowed himself a breath that seemed to ease him. "Shame is a poor pilot, but it brought me to your door, and that is better than leaving you for the queen." Sansa held the thought like a warm stone. He had tried to save father in one way and could not, and now he saved her. Perhaps that was not so poor a pilot. "Thank you," she said. It was thin, only 2 words to cover a cliff. "You can repay me by not dying on this voyage," Renly said with a small smile to take the sting from the bluntness. "And by sleeping now. The sea is like a child. It will mislike your shyness if you meet it overtired." "I don't think I can sleep," Sansa confessed. When I close my eyes I see. She did not finish. She looked down at her hands and found they had been rearranged into a new pair, tight and white. She loosened them finger by finger. Beldegar reached into a drawer and brought out a cup that had knocked about enough to earn its dents and a tiny flask of something that smelled sharp as mint, soft as almond. A finger of this with water, he said. And you may not sleep, my lady, but you will not fall to pieces while the ship breathes. He poured and added water from a skin and gave it to her with the steadiness of a man who had passed cups over tables that shook in every possible way. No more than this. She drank and found the taste strange and clean, like biting into a fruit whose skin gives reluctantly. When she handed the cup back, she saw Renly watching her with a brother's concern. Loras had his eyes on the charts, not reading them, only letting the lines stand in for something on which to rest a look that did not wish to be seen. The cabin creaked softly around them, little bones settling to sleep. "Will the queen know by morning?" Sansa asked. The question she had not dared let herself speak until the drink's warmth had spread to the place where her heart had been racing. "By dawn," Renly said. "Before, if Varys wishes her to. He will have decided already how much he wants the knowledge to be worth." He did not say the other part, to whom he wished it to be worth most. Sansa felt that like a draught where no window stood. "She will rage," he continued. "She will send ravens with angry little feet. She will say we stole you and it will be true. She will say we mean mischief for her boy." "And do you?" Sansa asked. Came out quickly before she had measured it. Renly looked at her with open surprise that then folded into respect. "For the boy, less than for the things done in his name," he said after a beat. "And if you were mine to guard by oath, I would answer you differently. But I am greedy in one particular. I want a better realm than the one she will make. The way to that runs through safety for you. It runs through other places too." He let the last phrase lie, unelaborated. Loras spoke up, light catching in his eyes where the lantern made a small golden line. "And I am greedy in another," he said. "I want my friends alive." He tipped an imaginary cup to Beldegar for the neatness of the truth. "Sleep if you can, my lady. The honeyed kiss hums to herself all night, but she is a good hummer." Renly rose then, not quickly, and Sansa realized he had not put aside the laundress cloak. He had only eased out of it enough to show his face in this small room. He gathered it now and tied it again, making himself back into the shape that the keep did not want to watch closely. 1 hour, he told Beldegar. Then the mouth. 1 hour, the captain agreed. Have the gods or don't. I will take the tide. He stood as well and, in standing, became authority again. I can give you a bit of the sail storage, my lady, whole as any bed once you have chosen not to mind the smell of canvas. Or you can sit on this bench until the sun. But the bench will be jealous of your spine by then and keep souvenirs. Choices. I'll lie down, Sansa said. The room had grown warmer again, and the drink softened everything's edge a little, as if someone had rubbed oil into the wood. She was suddenly very tired, as if each step she had taken were asking for its price all at once. They made her a narrow place between rolled sailcloth and a chest that smelled of resin. Loras brought a folded cloak and put it under her head without fuss, as if he had done so in 100 tents. She lay down on her side because that was how she used to sleep in Winterfell when the wind moaned past the shutters, because that was the pose of a person whose body remembered safety. The ship creaked to her in slow phrases, the timbers complaining and then contenting themselves. Above, a footfall passed, 2, 3. The muffled voice of a man said, "Hold," and then the word clicked through the floorboards and was gone. Sansa let her eyes close. Against the blackness of her lids, images came as they always did, Arya's fierce mouth, the angle of her father's hand upon a table, Jane's round, wet eyes, but now they were slower, like the pieces of colored glass in a maester's lens that turned once and then paused, their colors settling into an order she could look at without flinching. She found one little memory and held to it. The snow falling upon the godswood, each flake separate and perfect, and Arya laughing because her hair had caught a dozen and did not shake them off. She thought, I am going somewhere. She did not know where that somewhere was exactly, only that it was away from the place where promises turned as quickly as fish on a table. The knowledge was a small, firm pit in the fruit of her thoughts. She slept. Then, surprisingly, as the ship made ready to pry itself from the mouth of the river and risk the wider dark, Renly did not sleep. When Beldegar had left them, when Sansa's breathing steadied into the careful rhythm of a child who has been brave beyond her store and at last has put her courage on a shelf to cool, Renly sat again, elbows on knees, and listened to the timbers. Loras stood quiet as a suit of armor in the corner for a little while, then came and settled on the bench beside him with a soft clink of lamelli. They did not speak at first. Renly could feel the shape of words stacked in his throat like coins. They were heavy. He kept them there and instead brought to mind the map of the city as viewed from the Tower of the Hand. The rivers bend silver in daylight, the smell of stew rising from the street of flour, the rag market's shouts. On that map, men moved like lines of ants. His brother's shadow lay long across it, and farther north a boy named Robb Stark would hinge himself to this map soon enough, or break apart from it and make a second map with his own stubborn weather. "She has his courage," Loras said presently, in that soft tone he used when the walls were not wholly theirs. Writ small yet, like the first lines of a song. "She has a different courage," Renly said. His hands itched. He clasped them behind his neck and felt the salt dried where the rain had kissed him earlier. Ned's bravery sits up straight. Hers bends without breaking. That can carry farther. Loras hummed acknowledgement. He put his boot against the table leg and nudged it. A small gesture that only meant there is a table and we are two men beside it and the world is not only made of knives. "You told her true about your shame," he said, not making a question of it. Renly let out a breath that tasted of that same shame, warm and stale. "I told her not enough." "Do you ever get tired of the ways we are required to be men?" Loras laughed under his breath. "No, but I get bored. You, my love, grow tired because your manhood is a courtly garment with too much embroidery. Mine is armor. I shrug it and scratch my shoulder." He turned his head, the lantern giving him the look of a painted saint on a reach-sept wall, gold leaf catching the curve of his cheek. "You mean kingship?" Renly did not answer at once, but the word hung like a spice on the air. He had said it in his own mind 3 times since leaving the keep, the first time with a bridle, the second with a challenge, the third with a prayer pressed casually into the corner of a mouth. "She gives me a thread to pull," he said finally. "A Stark girl in my care. The Queen will call it a theft. I will call it a guardianship. The North will call it a hope. And there's the Tyrells, who call everything an opportunity until it proves itself otherwise." "Their tongues are flowered," Loras said with fondness that did not conceal knowledge. "My mother can fold a word into itself until it takes whatever shape she needs. She will like that you have acted and not only smiled." Renly smiled in spite of the heaviness and felt the familiar warmth of being seen. "Will she? And what will your father like?" "He will like that you have chosen our ship," Loras said, and it was almost teasing. He leaned back and let his head touch the paneling and closed his eyes without fully shutting them, lashes making a fine shade. "He will like any path that runs by our door and any man who arrives at it carrying the rumor of a crown. But he will tell himself he must not like it until you have named enough banners to make the liking respectable. So he will serve you wine and delay dessert and remark on the weather." Renly reached across to touch Loras's wrist, lightly, anchor to anchor. "And you?" Loras made a small noise. "I like the thought of you when you cut that knot you spoke of to the girl. I like the thought of you when you do not pretend the knot was never tied. And I like the thought of gardens that are not lying this time, where we can lay and not have the walls listen." Renly laughed softly. "The walls are listening even now." "Then let them be bored," Loras said, and let his head drop onto Renly's shoulder for a brief instant, long enough to become a note in memory and no more. Above, boots moved with a different urgency. The ship changed song. Beldegar's voice came through the boards. "Up with her. Quietly now. Let the river feel that you love her." Other voices answered in that talk sailors used. half cursing and half prayer, and the timbers creaked in reply. The honeyed kiss was deciding to go. Renly rose, not because there was anything he must do. Beldegar would scold him for putting his lordly fingers where Knot and Sail could not respect them. But because standing felt like action, and action would keep him from seeing again the way Ned Stark's jaw had set. He took one of the apples from the table and bit it. It was mealy. He ate it anyway. The taste filled his mouth with a tired sweetness that felt like a story about harvests told too late in the year. They made the mouth of the river under a sky that had thinned in the east until what had been black became the deep color of a bruise diluting and then a vein under skin. The stars were fewer. The lanterns of the anchored ships made a limited firmament below, closer to hand, and their reflections were long and broken. The tide had turned as Beldegar promised, and the river gave them as much as they took from it. They slid past the long chain that still lay coiled harmlessly on its island drum, and a gull called once more as if to mark the boundary that Sansa was crossing without seeing it. Down in the little cabin, Sansa stirred and opened her eyes. The word that formed in her mind, away, was neither lament nor triumph, only a shape she recognized and could carry. She lay quiet a moment longer and listened to the ship's breath, as Renly had called it, and felt her own match it until, for an instant, she could pretend they were one thing and would move together. Then she sat up, her hair loose under the hood now, slipping over her shoulder like a secret that had decided to comfort her instead of betraying her. Renly, seeing her move, came back from his leaning place by the companionway and took up the cloak Loras had used as a pillow, shaking it out wide. Hitch a small flourish as if they stood in some pavilion in a tawny field and not in the belly of a ship that was creeping past the Queen's teeth. "A fair dawn," he said quietly, "or a fair enough one." "It smells like rope," Sansa said, and Renly laughed. "It does. You will smell of rope too if you go up," he said. "But the first sight of the open sea is a medicine that cures its own sickness." She nodded. She did not know whether she wanted to be cured or to hold her sickness close, proof that she had been brave without instruction. She followed him up all the same, hand touching the ladder's worn rungs, the wood silky from use. The air hit her and made her eyes sting with its salt. The sky in the east was still uncolored, but it had lost its blackness. It was the color of the inside of a clamshell and just as blank. The Red Keep was only a slope of darkness now, a piece of the land rather than a thing men had built and named. The whole of the city lay low, smudged and featureless in the seam of river and sea. The deck crews were quiet and intent. A sail that had been caught up in a net of lines all night spilled itself and then gathered, belly filling with the mild offshore breath. The mast whispered to itself. Beldegar stood with his feet wide and his hands clasped behind him, looking not at the sails and not at the river mouth, but somewhere else that existed in his mind and made the ship go true. He lifted 2 fingers and a man at the stern adjusted a wheel a hair. Sansa watched a lantern on a fisherman's boat slide from one side of a line of sight to another and felt, idly, as if she could move the world with her own gaze. "Good," Beldegar said softly to the ship, not to them. "Good, sweet." The honeyed kiss answered him by not complaining when the first swell of open water took her. Sansa's stomach rolled once and found itself pleased by the novelty. "From there," Loras said behind Sansa, picking up the half-sentence and smiling for her alone now, "there will be roses. You'll see." "Do roses smell the same in the south as they do in the north?" Sansa asked. The question felt childish and she let it anyway. "They smell of whatever story you remember as you lift them," Loras said. "Thus, the Reach thinks its roses smell of victory. In the north, perhaps they smell of a small bright thing that dares to live where it should not." Sansa smiled then despite herself, a small, private smile that took her by surprise. She looked back only once toward the city. There was no light there that belonged to her any longer, and the dark did not call her name. The ship's prow took another breath and found the sea's rhythm more easily. What the morning would bring downriver in the Red Keep. Cersei's fury turned to commands, ravens shaking their feathers in the rookery, the sudden quiet of corridors where a girl had walked with her head bowed. Was not for Sansa to do anything about yet, and not for Renly either. There would be pages to that tale. There would be pages to this one too, and some of them would be written in a hand steadier than Sansa had thought her own would ever be again. She stood at the starboard rail as the last of the river fell behind like a line of chalk rubbed away with the heel of a hand, and she breathed the sea air into herself until her chest was full and then fuller, and let it out slow. The ship leaned to its work. The sky lightened. The gulls did not remember yesterday, and far inland, where the world was all brown fields and the smell of turned earth, the first of the ravens lifted from the bell tower at the Red Keep and went north with black wings, carrying letters written in a fair, careful hand that was Sansa's and not Sansa's, for Varys had been correct. The Queen's net had knots enough for many things. But the girl the letters named was not aboard the ship, whose captain spoke softly to his timbers, and the reach wind was freshening, and somewhere beyond the curve of the world, a green country lay awake, surprised to find itself a haven for a winter wolf. The river thinned to memory and the sea rose in its great slow breathing, and Sansa stood with her cloak tight at her throat and watched the light change as if it were a patient thing being coaxed awake by gentle hands. She had never seen the world widen like this. In the north, horizons came as clean hard lines, the edge of a wood, the scarp of a hill, the long white seam of snow along a ridge, but here the boundary was a gradual promise, a faint paleness that opened and kept opening until the first honest ray of sun escaped and made a path on the water like a bright strip of beaten copper. Beldegar's men moved around her as if the deck were a scripture they knew by heart. They did not jostle her. She began to read the ship's ways in small pieces, the way a man's voice dropped when he spoke to the helm, the quick flick of a wrist that eased a line, the steadying palm on a new-sewn seam of sail. She learned that ships had moods. The honeyed kiss was mild with them, the way an old horse is mild with a nervous child. She allowed more swaying than was strictly necessary, but never so much that Sansa feared she would be thrown. Renly's hair had found the wind and played with it. Loras had put aside his bucket now and, in the way of a man unashamed of appearing useful, was helping coil a line as if it were a serpent that would behave for him and him alone. He did it competently. When he looked over, he did not ask Sansa how she fared. Instead he said, "That sky means nothing but a fair day, if you believe sailors." "What do you believe?" Sansa asked. "That I do not know enough about the sea to contradict her," he answered, making the line settle into a neat flat coil that was deeply pleasing to look upon, "and that a good breakfast should not be missed, even by those who claim sorrow is a better companion than hunger." Her stomach felt hollow in the way an apple does when it has been cored. "I don't know if I can eat." "You can. You won't want to. That is different." His smile was brief and human. "The cook has a way with oat porridge that makes it seem a conquest." He saw her make a face and laughed. "There is honey." He was right, as men who are careful watchers often are. When Beldegar sent a boy down with 2 wooden bowls and spoons that had known long service, the porridge steamed as if it had considered becoming bread and changed its mind at the last moment. A thin drift of arbor honey lay across its surface, smelling of summer in some field Sansa had never seen. The first mouthful went down awkwardly. The second found its place more easily. The third reminded her body that it wished to go on. A cat, gray with a pale chin and a kink in its tail as if fate had given it an extra corner, appeared at her feet as if conjured. It sat and blinked and pretended it had never in its life begged a human for anything. Sansa thought of Lady, of the weight of her head against Sansa's knee and the particular musk of her fur when it had been warmed by the sun, and that thought was a cut. She let one tear fall and no more. The cat put its chin on the toe of her boot and purred valiantly, as if it understood the duty of a creature to a creature. Renly came to her elbow as a man might come to a parapet and rest his arms on it with you. He took a spoonful, made a face as if to say he had once eaten better and would again, and set the spoon aside. "When we reach the Mander's mouth, we will have a choice," he said, and the words were like a map spread on a table. "We can go to Old Town first, take shelter with Hightower and let rumor do some work for us, or we can slip straight along to the Mander's green throat and ride upriver toward Highgarden without hanging a bell on our arrival." "Which is safer?" Sansa asked. She liked the phrase he had used, green throat, and filed it away like a piece of ribbon she would tie onto a thought later when she needed to make it presentable. "For your body, the Mander. For our plans, Old Town, Renly said frankly. Old Town is a place men write letters from. It was built for letters. It is a city that makes news even when it sneezes. He smiled with half his mouth. But letters can be intercepted. Ears lean against walls even in Old Town. Especially in Old Town, Beldegar murmured as he passed, as if he could not let a false kindness linger in the air without pruning it. Sansa licked honey from the back of her spoon. I do not want bells, she said. I want quiet places where I can hear what I am thinking. I want to go where I am difficult to find. Highgarden, then, Loras said, with the ease of naming the most beautiful woman in a hall and expecting agreement. No bells unless my father hangs them, and he can be coaxed to hang none if the promise of better bells later is set before him. Better bells, Sansa said, in spite of herself. Loras tilted his head. There is a garden where the lattice is shaped like a crown and the roses climb it in 3 colors, he said, airy as a page of some old romance, yet his eyes sharpened as he spoke. Highgarden has always liked the look of crowns. It has seldom kept one long. The smile he gave Renly then was very small. Perhaps it is time to try again. Renly did not answer in words. His breath left him in something like a laugh that was not light. His hand touched the rail and his fingers tapped twice, as if he were speaking to the wood and not to them. Not before breakfast, he said. If we are to play at chess, let us at least agree which pieces are on the board. Am I a piece? Sansa asked before her courage faltered. The porridge had given her a steadiness she had not felt since the throne room, as if she'd put on some hidden armor beneath the brown gown. Renly turned to her full, and if he lied, he did it in a way that did not seek to humiliate her. We are all pieces, he said quietly, and some boards are not of our choosing. He paused. But you may be more than that. You may be the rule that says which game we are playing. She did not pretend to understand. She only nodded and filed the words among the others. The day unrolled itself in small tasks that were not, strictly speaking, hers to do but were offered to her as if they could be. Beldegar put a short length of line in her hands and taught her a simple knot first, then a prettier one that slid and bit, and when she had made it twice without having to watch her fingers, he said, There, my lady. Now you know the way to say hold fast in a language everyone at sea respects. She wore the knot like a bracelet until evening and then tied it to a nail under the rail where a length of line always hung, as if she had soldered a promise to the ship itself. When noon came, the sky had lifted to a pale blue that would have been too thin for a northern summer but seemed abundant here. The sea might have been beaten metal, just rough enough to warn a careless hand. A school of small fish turned at once just below the surface, and the movement was like a piece of cloth flipped by a seamstress to show the underside. Sansa laughed before she knew she had meant to. Loras looked over, smiled, made the same turn with his hand, and said, They are less lovely cooked. The cat chose that moment to sprawl on the warmest part of the deck and blink and stretch until it had used up most of the adjectives for indolence. Toward the late afternoon, after a long stretch of horizon that did not seem to admit the existence of land at all, a dark line appeared ahead and to starboard. It thickened and grew, and then resolved itself into a shape Sansa could name. An island, green-backed and low, its flanks studded with little flecks of white that resolved further into stone houses, and above them, further still, a pale tower like a finger pointing at the untroubled sky. The air changed as they approached. A faint sweet smell rode the wind, something like cut grass and something like wine when it first breathes in a cup. The arbor, Beldegar said. He spoke the 2 syllables as if they were a woman's name he did not expect to see again and wanted to be kind to in their parting. Not where we're going. He kept the honeyed kiss angled to catch the right slant of wind that would carry them past the island and toward the mainland coast beyond, where the mouth of the Mander lay like a shy smile in a green face. Sansa watched white sails fill and empty in the strait, a little ballet to which the red wine fleet had taught every lesser ship its steps. A high, fat-bellied winecog waddled importantly toward the island and cried greetings in a banner that showed 2 red grapes on a field of gold. Loras stood taller when he saw it, as if the very sight of his countrymen set a brace in his spine he could not quite conceal. Will they see us? Sansa asked. Know us? They will see us, Beldegar said. Knowing is a different art. If the Red Wines wanted to know every boat that kisses their shores, there would be no wine drunk in King's Landing that did not arrive late and angry. We will pass as we are, one more little boat going somewhere that is its business. He glanced to Loras. Unless a Tyrell banner climbs my mast of its own accord. This sailcloth is plain enough that if you stabbed it, it would bleed brown, Loras said, amused. You are safe from my vanity, Captain. He looked to Sansa then, and his voice lost its teasing shape. It is a pleasure to see my home from the sea and know I am bringing someone to it who requires gentleness. Gentleness. The word made Sansa think of a hand laid upon a brow, cool and competent. She had not allowed herself many such thoughts since the Godswood at Winterfell, where a mother's hand could ease a fever without complaint. Will they be kind? She asked, and hated herself a little for needing to. My mother is a sword with no sheath, Loras said, smiling as he said it, somehow turning it into a compliment. She will not waste sharpness on you. My grandmother's tongue can cut, but only when she chooses to dress meat for a meal. And there is my brother Willis, who writes letters to men he dislikes because he wishes to hate no one he does not understand. Something softened in his face then, as if he'd set down a weight that only he had been able to carry. He is not like me. Renly's mouth twitched. You would have me love him less, he said lightly, and Loras, not blushing, Loras did not blush. His face had learned early how not to, rolled his eyes in a gesture that made him briefly the boy he had been before he noticed the way men watched him ride. Love him differently, Loras said, then more softly to Sansa. Willis is good, in the old sense of the word, the sense that makes men in stories sigh and women in songs touch their throats. He will not frighten you. Sansa thought of Joffrey's beauty, how it had shone like a coin, fine from the mint, and how she had wanted it to buy her a future she could name and embroider. That is a very good, she said. Evening found them feeling their way into the Mander's mouth. The river did not declare itself the way the Blackwater had, with a ruined chain island to mark it, but slid into the sea almost shyly. If you did not know where to look, you might have believed the whole coast to be no more than two greennesses pressed together. Beldegar did know. He sent a boy up the Ratlins to watch for the faint line where fresh water carved the salt, and when that line was found, the honeyed kiss altered her grace. The sea's roll softened to a different breathing, deeper, warmer, more full of the smell of growing things. Sansa leaned out and saw reeds bow and stand along the banks, little clouds of midges making a faint haze that the wind tore and reknitted. Here, Beldegar said, as if greeting an old shy friend. Here we go quiet. They did. Voices dropped. The oarsmen took their places in silence, and their handles spoke quietly to the tholes. The mast came down by degrees, and the sail, newly content, was bundled and tied as carefully as a babe before sleep. The river took them in. The sky went from honey to wine to velvet, and the lanterns on the deck were hooded until they glowed like thoughtful eyes and no more. That night, Sansa dreamed of Winterfell's Godswood and woke into a room that smelled of resin and tar and the faint vegetal perfume the river gifted their cargo planks. She kept her breath slow and counted the creaks until her heart remembered how to behave. The little knot she had tied swung gently where she'd left it, and she felt, strangely, as if she had left a piece of her mind with it, a surety that would not desert her even if sleep did. In King's Landing, while Sansa slept, a corridor was bright with torches at an hour when torches remarked upon their own light and found it suspicious. Cersei's gown was black as polished jet, and the neckline climbed her throat like a gloved hand. When they showed her the empty room and the blankets that had lost their shape, she did not speak for a count of 10, and all around her men remembered small urgent errands they might have done better if they had been somewhere else. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice. "Who?" she said. The woman in charge of the Queen's swing linens made a small sound and clutched the keys at her belt as if they were a relic. My queen, it appears. The guard at the end of the corridor, he says 2 laundresses." "Who?" Cersei repeated, and this time the word had teeth. The guard stammered. Names were offered, half-suspected names, Too many names. A net cast into a pond in the hope of catching a single slipper. Varys stood beside the hearth and looked sorrowful without letting any of that sorrow touch his eyes. Littlefinger arrived later, sleep's rumple still in his hair, as if he had been startled to wakefulness by something other than routine. Cersei's gaze cut him as cleanly as thread cut by a knife. "Your guards," she said. "Your keys. Your keep. And the girl is flown." "Girls do that when girls are startled," Littlefinger said mildly. "They are birds by nature, your grace. They find small cracks and make them doors. But if you would have a bird, one can always be trapped. There are other birds." Cersei had not slept since the bells had tolled and then had ceased, final as a door's slam. "I do not want a bird," she said. "I want the Stark girl." The cup she held made a small sound against the table. The wine within did not move. "You may well have her yet," Varys said, hands intertwined so neatly that one could believe they had been carved so. "There are nets around the river gate that a minnow would not slip. She cannot swim as far as the city's mouth without the boatmen noticing. And boatmen are gossips. Gods bless them, if one meets their price." Cersei turned her head slowly toward him. "And you intend to put the right rumor in the right mouth to give her back to me?" "I intend," Varys said, and allowed a beat of silence as if to consider phrasing. "To know where she is and ensure that knowledge cannot be used by the wrong hands. I intend, too, to give you other tools, your grace. The North will not sail to pull down your gates. It must be walked. That will take time. You may spend that time in fury or thrift. Letters are thriftier than swords, if one wishes to buy some quiet hours. The girl's hand is known to those who matter. It is a careful hand, a dutiful hand, can be mimicked for a good cause." Cersei sipped her wine and found it tasteless. "Do it," she said, without the bother of pretending that what he suggested was anything but a theft of a different sort. Then to Sandor Clegane, who stood as if he had been carved from stone and set into a hall as a grim joke. "Take 20 men. Drag every lank of the river quays by its corners. If a mouse had her in its mouth, I want the mouse." Sandor's mouth made the shape of a smile and then abandoned the attempt. "And if the mouse dropped her in the bay?" he asked. "Then drown the bay," Cersei said, and returned her attention to the map spread on the table, as if the map were a man who had failed her and might yet be coaxed into a better answer if she stared at it long enough. Littlefinger watched her watch the map, and the corner of his mouth decided to curl. "It may be," he said in a tone that felt like a finger under a chin, lifting it, "that the Reachers grow gardens for more than their food." Cersei did not look up. "If the Tyrells have her, then they are either our dearest friends or our cleverest enemies," Peter murmured. The word cleverest carried a little perfume he did not bother to hide. "Right," Cersei said to Varys, "and I will sign." Her eyes were green glass. "Make the North believe she begs them to bend. I don't care what words you put in her mouth, so long as she is putting them in someone else's ear by nightfall." Varys bowed the exact amount that was not quite deference and left the room moving like the idea of a man, not the man himself. Sandor went the other way with his 20. Littlefinger stayed and stood too close to the place where the candle warmed the map and made a small greasy circle. Cersei's hand moved and smudged it, and she did not apologize. "She was only a little bird," she said, half to herself. "Let someone else feed her crumbs now and see if she sings the same." In the black cells below, where a man could hear water drip and begin to believe the sound would engrave itself on his bones, Eddard Stark sat with his back against a wall that smelled of old sin and cold iron and tried to find a spot on it that had not known pain. He did not think about the day that had been. He did not let himself yet. He held to the smallest things because those were the ones that floated, the way Arya had always rolled her bread in her fingers before eating it, as if she were seeing whether it would make a good ball to throw at her brother. The sound Sansa's comb made when he had once, twice, been asked to untangle a knot and had done it with more patience than skill. Catelyn's voice when she was so angry she was quiet. He did not pray. He had done so already, and the gods did not need a nag. The scrape of a shoe outside his cell made him lift his head. Varys came as if he were visiting a sick uncle and had brought a joke to tell him. He smelled faintly of clean linen and some powder that made rats hesitate. "You are harder to find than a contrite lordling," Varys said, because he had to say something. "I had to bring a lantern to make this path think of light." "So you did," Ned said. "He did not ask for water. One asked for water and received words." Varys set the lantern down and leaned his hands on his thighs, as if he were a man who had known honest fatigue. "I am obliged to tell you," he said, the sentence already softened by the way he had wrapped it in obligation, "that one of your daughters is not in her bed. The other is also not in her bed. The city is a sieve and children are clever at finding the holes." Ned closed his eyes and opened them again on the same small circle of lantern light. The breath he took was so deep it seemed not to end, and then it did, and the ending was a little painful. "Arya is Arya," he said. "Sansa." His voice almost broke on the name. It did not. Words were easier than tears. They had bones. "Where?" Varys considered, and then placed a small piece of truth on the table between them like a coin that had passed through too many hands to be shameful to spend. "Away from the Queen's hand," he said. "I have arranged stranger kindnesses than this in my time. Allow me this small mercy. She is alive, and she has not been dragged by her hair to a place where Cersei Lannister can turn her face into a lever." Ned's shoulder blades pressed the stone as if the whole cell were one taut bow and he were the string, and then the tension gave a hair. "Arya?" he asked. "I would not lie where it gains me so little," Varys said. "Arya Stark has a cat's talent for absence. I will tell you when that absence, too, moves away from the Queen. In the meantime, I have come to beg an old favor for a city that thinks itself young. Live." He lifted a hand when Ned's mouth opened. "I am too old for honor speeches. Live because there are worse men than you waiting to stand where you sit. Live because some version of tomorrow requires it. Live because a girl who has your eyes may need the shape of your hand later when she reaches for a memory to tell her where to place her own." Ned's laugh was very quiet and had no mirth. "You ask me to lie. I ask you to bend as the grass bends and then stands again," Varys said. "If you prefer the word lie, you may have it. I prefer the word spare." Ned closed his eyes again. He saw a hall lit with northern light and a girl with auburn hair who believed in songs because the world had not yet taught her how songs end. "If I bend," he said, "will the children be safe?" "As safe as any child in a world where kings are born and die," Varys said. He did not add the other clauses his mind held. He had learned when to spare his own tongue too. "Then," Ned said, and found the word far down inside himself, "I will live." Varys bowed again, the same careful amount, and took up the lantern. "Thank you," he said, and then, because even he was human, "and forgive me." The river carried the honeyed kiss by night as easily as she had carried herself by day, and the morning that came to them had a different green to it, the particular green you find when you hold a leaf up to the sun and see the light come through it, a green that feels like the memory of taste. The banks swelled in low humps of meadow and orchard, a clutter of willows that trailed their fingers in the water as if flirting. Farmsteads took shape and then were gone, each with its particular confidence. A high barn painted a foolish blue, a neat hedge clipped as if the house were a soldier, a yard where flax lay bleaching and a girl turned it with a rake and sang to it under her breath. They stopped at a little wharf toward evening to trade 3 casks of the least good wine for bread and river fish and a handful of apples with skins red as a blush. The villagers did not look twice at Sansa. She had learned how to stand with her shoulders a little hunched and her head bent. She had learned to carry a bundle that had nothing in it. Loras in a plain cloak and a sword looks like a boy trying to be a man. No one ever watched such boys very closely unless they had daughters. Beldegar, talking easily with the man who owned the wharf, made an elaborate complaint about a leak he did not have and a mast he would soon replace that did not need replacing. Sansa took in the smell of the place. Wet boards, yeast, the faint familiar rot of fish, and filed it with other notes that told her she was not dreaming this new life. On the second day upriver, the current gentled and widened so that the surface of the water lay smooth enough to borrow the sky's face for a long time and not smudge it. Cattle stood belly deep near the banks and flicked their ears at flies. Men in flat-bottomed boats cast nets in arcs that were more beautiful than the nets had any right to be and hauled them in with hands that had learned the precise, slow strength that pulled without breaking. Renly came and leaned beside her again, the way a man might make a habit of turning up at your best prospect. "When we reach Middlebury, we leave the river," he said. "There will be horses. You will have a mare who likes to think she is 3 years younger than she is. Loras will have a gelding who hates him for no reason I can discern. I will have a brown horse who will embarrass me by being the best-behaved animal within a mile. It is always so. You may infer what you please." "I infer that you are not a liar when you do not need to be," Sansa said, and he looked at her with surprised delight, as if she had done a trick he had not explained to her. At Middlebury, as if the river had been listening for its cue and had chosen to be generous, the current slowed almost to a halt, and a long, broad dock stuck into it like a tongue. Market day had left its breath behind. A smell of crushed herbs, a ghost of spilt beer, the particular tired contentment of dogs that have received many hands and many scraps. Renly's men were already there, or Tyrell men who were his for the present. Sansa saw green cloaks with golden roses. She saw wheat-colored hair and more brown hair, eyes that were Sionist, hands that had learned polish over rope callus. She did not see banners. That was a kindness. They had a litter ready for her, carried by 4 men who looked only slightly murderous about the prospect of trudging at a lady's pace through miles of sun-warmed countryside. She shook her head and asked for the mare Renly had promised. The mare looked her over as if making a list of her faults and lowered her head to mock-bite the lead rope. Sansa reached and touched the velvet-soft place above the nostril and found the breath there warm and decided. "Hello," she said, with more assurance than she felt. The mare's ears flicked, one forward in interest, one back in a gesture that said, "Do not presume too far." They rode. The road wound among hedges trimmed as neatly as a lady's fringe. The fields lay in strips that alternated pale stubble and green hope. Every mile or so a canal cut across the land at an angle that suggested a mind had persuaded water to do something water did not wish to do by nature. Sansa had heard Winterfell men joke about the softness of the south, the way soil here yielded to fingers and did not require a swear to turn. She had imagined that softness as an absence. It was not. It was an accumulation. The land here looked like a careful bed made by someone who loved the sleepers and wished them no harm. Renly watched her watch it and said nothing. Loras, who could not leave a silence alone when it might be an opportunity for charm, pointed out the small glories as if he had invented them. A hedge of sweetbriar that would put out flowers as soon as the weather decided not to be petulant. A flock of geese marching along a field boundary like soldiers with some grudge against worms. A man high on a ladder trimming a pear tree into the shape of a crown because his father had done so and because his father's father had, and not because any man had told him to. Sansa found herself smiling without having decided to. In the afternoon, the road bent, and a shadow lay upon it in a shape that had not been cast by a tree. Sansa's mare tossed her head and snorted as if she, too, recognized the change. Ahead, the mander spread in a rich green loop, and above that loop rose a mass of pale stone that had been given a shape more like music than like a fortress. Highgarden, all curves and terraces and surprise glints of water where small channels ran and fell. Banners were not flying. The day was too mild to demand them. But somewhere inside, she knew there were banners enough to cover a field. A small company had already mustered to greet them at the lower gate. Green cloaks gathered like a stand of reeds, men with their armor polished to the sort of glow that never becomes vulgar, and in front of them a woman whose gown had not one bit of nonsense upon it and yet managed to look like style. Her hair was the exact color of a new-minted coin, bright without foolishness. She sat a mare who loved her and who would have followed her into a river if asked. "Loras," she called, and the voice was a bell rung properly, not to show off the tone but because bells had a job to do. "You bring weather and trouble as usual. What have you smuggled under that plain cloak? If it is a stray dog, you are to keep it out of my solar." Marjorie Tyrell's smile, when it came, was not made of sweetness. It was made of accuracy, the sort of smile a good dancer gives her partner when he steps where he should. She guided her mare 3 steps forward and stopped so precisely that Sansa felt both horse and rider were a single thought. "My lady," Marjorie said, as if Sansa were already a piece of a world she had been expecting and was pleased to find shaped as it ought to be. "Welcome to a place that will not ask you to pretend you cannot bleed." Sansa had 1,000 responses, none of them ready. She found the oldest and best and used it because it had never failed her mother. "You are kind," she said, and managed not to add for a southerner. Olenna Redwine came out from under the arch after the first greetings had been exchanged and made short work of everyone's illusions. She was small, and she moved like an irritably intelligent bird, and her wimple was tied at such an angle that it suggested she had agreed to wear it only after a long argument and would remove it as soon as no one was watching. She looked Sansa over once, not with the contempt an old woman might give a young one, but as a builder looks at a piece of wood. What can be made of this? Will it warp? How will it accept the nail? Then she put out her hand and Sansa gave hers, because when an old woman in the Reach holds out a hand, you take it if you have any sense. "We'll fatten you a little," Olenna said. "Not too much. Fat girls are for kings who want to do as they please without the labor of kindness. We are aiming higher." Her eyes snapped to Renly then and to Loras, and to Marjorie last, with a look that was almost pride and almost complaint. "You have brought me a live thing and not a story of a live thing. Good. Come in out of the weather before the weather decides to take your heads off to see what your brains look like." Marjorie laughed and made a little gesture with her wrist that set the whole company turning, as if the gesture had tugged a string that ran through all of them. Sansa's mare decided to be good. They passed under the lowers of Highgarden's gate, and the air changed again, as if it had been filtered through leaves and slow water. The place smelled of fresh-cut herbs, warm stone, and bees. The inner wards were not the square, stern courtyards Winterfell possessed. They were curves and levels, lawns that sloped like the shoulders of a contented woman, and niches where fountains gave themselves away by the sound before you saw them. Children ran at the edges of sight and then hid because they had been told they were not to bother the riders, and because the thrill of disobedience has no flavor if the rules are not remembered first. Sansa saw 3 old men in brown tending to a square of earth with a reverence that suggested the earth had told them a joke. She saw a girl not much younger than herself at a window with a lute in her lap, plucking and frowning and starting again as if the instrument's vanity demanded to be stroked. She felt, in a small place under her sternum she had not noticed in King's Landing, something lift. In a hall whose windows were more air than glass, Mace Tyrell waited with his maester and 2 knights whose noses proclaimed them brothers though their eyes did not agree. Mace was a big man who wore his bigness pleasantly, the way a well-stuffed cushion wears its shape with no apology. He came forward with his hands spread and took Renly's forearms like a friend who is pleased to be seen being a friend, and then kissed Marjorie's hair, and then made a set of remarks to Loras that were genuinely affectionate and essentially empty, and then turned his smile upon Sansa. "My Lady Stark," he said, giving her the dignity of a name that would cause some to look twice. "We are honored. My house owes your house more than one courtesy." He paused as if remembering exactly how the courtesies had been incurred and deciding it would be ungenerous to list them now. Highgarden is a soft place when it is allowed to be, and hard enough when hardness is called for. You shall have the softness. "Thank you," Sansa said, and did not ask what the price of that softness might be. It would be named in time, and even if it were never named, it would still be owed. That was the way of the world her mother had spoken of when Sansa had been too young to listen properly. They gave her a chamber that overlooked the western lawns and a piece of river that cut through them with a gentle insistence, and a balcony where vines had learned to climb into a net that threw little squares of shade on the floor as the afternoon went away. The bed was too fine for her mood, carved posts and linen that made a whisper when she lay upon it and turned her cheek, but she did not refuse it. A girl her own age came with water and a soft-spoken question about whether the lady would like the south country fashion of perfume on her hair or the north country plainness of only water and comb. Sansa chose water. The girl's hands were quick and had a way of holding hair so that it did not hurt when it was pulled, which is a skill that can make a stranger into a friend. When the girl was gone, Sansa stood on the balcony and breathed and tried to remember to let the air out again. The river spoke in its little voice and kept its own counsel. When she felt the band inside her chest loosen, she turned and went to the sept they had shown her on the way to her room. a place of white stone and cool echoes, with windows that had been made to teach light how to be colored without humiliating it. She knelt on the smooth, worn step at the mother's feet and did not speak aloud. The words had not learned how to arrange themselves kindly in her mouth without breaking. She let them be thoughts instead, and imagined that the statue had a way to take thoughts in as well as spoken prayers. She told the mother that if she wished to make good use of a daughter's tears, she had them to spend. She asked, without drama, for Arya to have her own kind of luck. She said father's name once and did not try to embroider it. Olenna found her there, because Olenna could find anyone anywhere if she had decided to. The old woman did not come and kneel, because that would have been a comedy the gods did not deserve. She sat on the bench instead and clucked her tongue once, a sound that in any other mouth would have meant condescension, and in hers meant brisk attention. "If you are asking for the men of the world to be better than they are," she said, "you are wasting your voice. If you are asking to become strong enough to endure them, you will be heard." Sansa looked up at her and wiped her face without embarrassment. The sept made embarrassment seem trivial, like a game children play to show they know the rules. "What if I wanted both?" "Then you are a girl and not a fool," Olenna said. She leaned forward, her bird's eyes sharp and curious. "Tell me, are you sweet because no one has asked you to be otherwise? Or because sweetness is a knife you have learned to hold without appearing to? Do not be insulted. I have no use for sugar in the kitchen except on fruits that demand it. But some girls have spent long hours teaching their mouths how to smile when they would rather bite. That is a skill we admire here. It is tiring, but it keeps you from starving." Sansa thought of Cersei's smile, hard as glass. She thought of Marjorie's, precise as a dance step. She thought of her own, which had been so easy once and lately had felt like a garment made for a younger sister and borrowed without permission. "I would learn," she said, and then, because the words had escaped her and she could not put them back in, "I do not want to become a woman who breaks other women to make herself feel less frightened." "Oh!" Lena's mouth twitched. "There are worse ambitions. Come. Supper is not improved by piety, and my bones like a cushion more than these stone benches." She rose and extended a hand without looking at it, knowing it would be taken. "We must dress you in colors that do not make your hair do all the work." Dinner in Highgarden was not the riot that men in Winterfell's hall had used to laugh about when they spoke of southern banquets. It was generous without cruelty. There were bowls of peas so green they looked like jewels, a platter of river fish roasted on a bed of lemon slices so thin you could have read a letter through them, bread that cracked its dark crust to reveal a tender heart, and honey thick enough to stand a spoon in that made lesser honeys ashamed. There was wine, yes, in 3 shades, and it did not insist on itself. Marjorie sat with Sansa and told her the names of the household as if they were plants in a garden, and this one needed more shade, and that one would sulk if watered too often. Loras told a story involving a fool, a sow, and a carved wooden saint that left the table laughing without anyone having to be cruel for the sake of mirth. Renly spoke little and watched much, which was unlike him, and that told Sansa that he had set his mind to something and was looking for confirmation in the corners of the room rather than the center. Mace boomed and swelled and did not break. Olenna pricked him twice with remarks so neat that if you were not listening you might have missed the way they deflated him gently so he would not burst. After the meal, while the household dissolved into little islands, the old men with their after-supper dice, the girls with their whispering, the pair of hounds under the table politely pretending not to notice the piece of meat a kitchen boy had dropped with suspicious deliberation, Willis Tyrell came as if he had been waiting for a moment when he would not be introduced as a title first. He walked with a stick carved so beautifully that the eye was drawn to it, and then, once it had admired the work, allowed itself to see the leg it supported as no shame at all. He had a broad, thoughtful face, brown hair that curled at the ends as if it could not help itself, and eyes that had spent long hours reading and a longer while watching the world itself. "My Lady Stark," he said, and the warmth in his voice did not condescend to her youth. "Welcome. I am Willis." She rose and made a small curtsy, because she would not throw away the little courtesies that had always sustained her. "Thank you for welcoming me," she said. "Your home is like a song I did not know I remembered." He smiled in a way that did not feel like a test. That is exactly the sort of thing we hope visitors will say and even believe, he said. May I show you our hawks tomorrow, if you like such creatures? They are honest in a way men rarely are. If they do not trust you, they will tell you in a fashion that leaves no doubt. I would like that, Sansa said, and thought of the time she had watched Septa Mordain so under the window and had thought birds were there to make the scene prettier. And then perhaps you will tell me the names of your herbs. Lady, my mother. She corrected herself because to say lady was to invite grief to sit down and take wine. My mother once made a garden of those in a courtyard, and there was a plant with little purple flowers that made the stew softer somehow. I would like to see if it grows here. It grows, Willis said, pleased that she had asked a question that did not involve gowns or gambles. We call it sweet harrow here, because some idiot knight once broke his horse's leg on a patch of it and levied a complaint against the poor plant. We will find you some. It likes the company of beans. He did show her the hawks next morning, and something in Sansa unwound a little as a tearsel looked into her eyes and decided she was not a threat. Willis taught her how to hold her arm correctly, how to keep her body's tension quiet so the bird did not believe she was about to send it and then snatch it back, how to admire the way a creature takes what it needs without apology and yet returns because it has learned to trust the hand that feeds without being enslaved. He spoke of Oberyn Martell without flinching and without bitterness, and in doing so taught Sansa how to carry an old wound without asking everyone else in the room to bleed too. Marjorie came to Sansa in the afternoons with women and girls whose laughter felt like a cool cloth placed on a fevered brow. She did not ask Sansa for secrets. She did not tell her any of her own that could not bear sharing. She taught Sansa 3 ways to fold a letter so that it did not look like a love letter even if it was. She taught Sansa the Reach songs that spoke softly about strength, not the ones drunk men bellowed about conquests. Once they rode out to where the river made a lazy S and watched a boy school a colt in a paddock. His patience as beautiful as any bravery Sansa had ever seen in a yard where men had cheered for blood. Olenna began to feed her short remarks the way a clever nurse feeds a sick child, little sips of bitter medicine wrapped in something sweet. When you are asked what you want, she told Sansa as they walked in a part of the garden where thyme grew in low mats and released its scent like a rumor underfoot. Name something a little less than what you want. You will be given half of that. You will hate the woman you become if you do not plan for men to disoblige you. Love them if you must. Some of them are amusing and some even worth the effort, but do not plan on them. Plan around them. You see, there is difference. You northern girls always think the shortest line between 2 points is a straight one. It is not, dear. Sometimes the path curves, so you do not find a spear behind a hedge. Sansa listened, and she did not always agree, but she took the words and turned them in her hands and decided which to keep for long and which to keep only until another came to replace it. She went to the sept when she needed to, and she stood in the outer greens at dusk and looked north until her eyes watered in the hope that distance would shrink for once. And she wrote a letter she did not send to her mother, and another she did not send to her father, and one she did not send to Arya because Arya would laugh at receiving a letter when she could have a sword. She learned the names of the girls who made the beds and of the boy with a crooked tooth who cleaned the brazier in the evening and sang to it while he worked, and when she thanked him, he stared as if no one had thought to speak to him with courtesy before and then, blushing furiously, told her she had a voice that made the air sit up and listen. News came as it always does, in lumps and shavings, in pieces that fit nothing until one day they fit everything. A hawker in the small market outside Highgarden cried Robert's name with the past tense hanging on it like a torn sleeve, and men paused and said the words there and back. Dead, 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 until they felt less like a bruise. Ravens came to Mace from King's Landing with news written in a hand that could have been Sansa's if Sansa had allowed her hand to become a tool in another woman's grip. Pleas for peace, for sense, for mercy that would have meant the opposite when interpreted by men drunk on their own noise. Mace read them and harumphed and took them to Olenna. Olenna read them and sniffed and took them to Renly. Renly read them and took them to Sansa and placed them on the table as one places meat before a hound one has decided to trust. It is not my hand, Sansa said. The steadiness of her voice surprised her. But if it were, I would not ask them to do what these words ask. No, Renly said, and folded the letter again neatly. I know, but others will not know. Letters are not men. They cannot put their hands on a table and let the table learn whether they shake. We must answer them with something better than denial." "What?" Sansa asked. "A better letter," Olenna said, appearing as if from a hedge with a pair of shears she had been using to decapitate roses that had behaved badly. "Written by a hand that is not yours but will be known as yours before long, because men believe what is placed in their cups if the cup is silver. Do not look so scandalized. Your father once lied to an Umber about how many arrows he had. That is all this is. We will tell the North that you are safe. We will tell them that no word in your name comes from King's Landing. We will tell them that if they must come south, they should do so politely and with their banners turned flat so our archers can count them properly." The shears went snip. A rose head fell and rolled like a spent coin. "And we will tell them nothing at all about what we intend for you until the day comes when they would be foolish to refuse it." "What do you intend for me?" Sansa asked. Olenna looked at her as if assessing whether the blade she held would cut cloth as nicely as it cut plant. Then she softened. "We intend, child, to place you where you will not be torn to pieces by a boy who was shaped by a woman's fear and a man's neglect," she said. "We intend to make you harder to use. We intend to make you happy, if we can, and useful if we cannot." Renly cleared his throat, took the shears away from Olenna with a look that had learned not to be shocked by her, and said carefully, "It would not be a poor thing if the North believed itself tied to the Reach by a promise that could be kept, not one that required contortion. My Lord Willis does not do harm without cause. He did not finish. It was not his to offer, not yet." Sansa's mind went to places it had been taught to think of as inevitable, the way a woman is given to a man and then learns how to be herself within the boundaries of his house, and then to places that had never been offered to her before, the way a woman might choose between two kindnesses and pick the one that allowed her to keep more of herself. "You would have me promise to a man I have just met," she said, because even to herself she would not pretend the strangeness did not exist. "You would have time," Willis said from the doorway, his hand on his stick as if it were less a support than a friend. "If you wished it, years." He did not step further into the room until Sansa nodded for him to. "I do not want a wife who does not want me. I can keep hawks for company. But if a marriage could make a wall high enough to keep a girl safe from certain weather while other storms go by, I would be proud to stand upon it with her and watch the flood recede." Sansa looked at his face and saw no trap there, only the possibility of a life that would be made of kindness and small cleverness and the occasional ordinary sorrow that any life must find room for. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She said, "I will not choose this while my father breathes in a cell and my sister is somewhere in a city that wants her to be a story and not a girl. I will not choose it while a queen with hair like sunlight and teeth like a wolf waits to see how the board is set. But I will learn your hawks. I will eat your peas. I will sing at your table when you need a song and be silent when you need silence. And when the time comes to choose, I promise I will not pretend that words are not stones that make a path." Olenna snorted in what might have been approval. "There, a northern bargain," she said, "thick as porridge and twice as nourishing. Good. Let us write letters, then, and compose rumors and send them out with the bees." Loras and Renly walked the lower orchards in the long light of evening and talked as men talk who have learned the cost of their secrets and wish to spend words freely while they can. Renly spoke of crowns without wearing the word on his face. Loras spoke of battles without making them a romance. They did not touch. That was part of the cost. The air between them was companionable without needing constant proof of its warmth. "You could," Loras said, the words finding the space where they could be said without echo, "be a king men love." Renly plucked an apple and turned it in his hand, appraising its blush as if he were a wife choosing a fruit for her husband's supper. "Men love what feeds them," he said, "or what flatters them. I should like to feed them. I do not have the patience to flatter as often as a king must." He looked sideways and grinned, and there was the boy again, whole as he had been before the world tried to carve him. "My brother would feed them a sermon. My brother's brother would feed them a sword. I will give them bread and will not lecture them on the proper way to chew it." "Will you give them war?" Loras asked, the word quiet as a knife laid on linen. If they insist, Renly said. If Cersei insists on building a world in which only the loud and the cruel are obeyed, then I should like to be loud differently and cruel not at all in a way that still makes men move. He bit the apple and made a face. Sour. You picked this tree to test me. I picked this tree because its fruit is honest, Loras said. You know what you are biting. I do not want you surprised when you find a worm. I have been eating worms all my life, Renly said cheerfully. Some wore golden armor. Across the realm, men tightened saddles and unrolled banners and talked to their gods, loudly or quietly or not at all, depending on the habits those gods had taught them. In Winterfell, a boy had his hair cut with a knife rather than shears and looked in a polished metal disc and did not quite recognize the man that reflected at him. A raven took the air with a letter tied to its leg in a careful hand that was not Sansa's, and another raven with a letter in a careful hand that was Sansa's but would never be sent, because Sansa had put that letter under her pillow and cried on it once and then folded it again, and tears are not good ink. At King's Landing, Joffrey Baratheon practiced standing very straight and enjoyed the way words made men move even when the words were badly chosen. Cersei held her shape like a woman wearing a corset 2 sizes too small and refused to let anyone see her pant. Varys moved like oil carried by water down a gutter toward a place where the earth is dry. Littlefinger moved like a rat who has learned to wear silk slippers. The Hound searched, and when he found nothing, he returned and did not apologize. Sansa's name was said in rooms where it had not been spoken before, and in some mouths it acquired a tender shape, and in others it grew teeth. Sansa learned how to say no 3 different ways without using the word. She learned where the light fell in the solar at different hours and which chair did not creak under an old woman who demanded it not. She learned that if you must cry in a place where you will be seen, doing it with your back to a fountain makes a different sound than if you do it under a tree, and that people who will interrupt you under a tree will leave you alone by a fountain because they will pretend to think you are only listening to the water. She learned to play Syvas badly and laugh at her own lack of skill, and to watch Renly play it well without letting the game draw blood out of the room. One afternoon, Margaery brought Sansa to a little pavilion on a lawn where the grass had been allowed to grow high because the bees liked it. The pavilion's roof was woven of willow withies and, looking up through it, Sansa could see the sky as if through a net. There was a table with food that had not been fussed over, the sort of food women make for themselves when no man is watching and do not bother to arrange to look inviting. And there were books. Margaery pushed the food at Sansa until Sansa took some. Then she pushed the books. I thought, she said, of all the queens I have read about, and I thought about how many of them learned to rule before anyone gave them a crown. It is dull to learn this way, but safer than learning with men's lives. This, she tapped one book, tells you about rents and what happens when you make the rents too high for too long. This one tells you about bridges and why they fail when proud men insist on putting them where rivers have decided they should not go. This one is women's letters to one another about husbands who die and leave them a mess. I like that one best. The women are frankly annoyed. Sansa opened the rent book and found numbers comforting in a way she had not expected. They behaved if you asked them politely. She read about the way a field yields more if you rotate what you ask of it, and she thought about how a heart might be like that. How perhaps one could ask a part of the heart to grieve for a time and then let that part rest and ask another to do a different task, and in this way keep the whole from going fallow. She did not say so aloud. It felt like a thought that would look silly if exposed too soon to the air. Margaery read beside her and did not speak unless she had something worth saying, and that too was a kindness. Willis sat with them sometimes and told stories that contained instruction without making instruction their point. Once, he began one such tale. I bought a hawk because the man selling it named a price so low I thought I had found myself a prize. The hawk was beautiful and its eye clear. It did not take prey. Not once. It flew and returned and looked very fine and refused to strike. I returned to the man and accused him of cheating me, and he said, Sir, you did not ask me whether the bird hunted. You asked me what price it was. I told you the price it was. You did not like the answer the bird gave you because you asked it the wrong question. I learned to ask better questions after that. What is the right question to ask of me? Sansa asked, more to test him than to learn anything she did not already know about herself. The question is not for me, Willis said gently. It is for you. But if I were presumptuous enough to ask one, I would ask whether you are willing to become a different person on purpose, rather than simply letting the world hammer you into one by accident. Sansa thought of her knots and of the way the ship had answered them, and of Cersei's smile, and of Marjorie's lessons in how to fold letters, and of Olenna's shears, and of Renly's patient silence. I am, she said, and felt the truth of it settle inside her like a small stone that would not shift when the path grew uneven. They sent letters. Some were simple. The North was told, by a careful rumor that went the way water goes through a hedge, that their girl was in good hands and that no words in her name issued from the city, that if they marched, they might yet find friends in places where they had not thought to look, that the Reach's fields grew bread for any who did not come to trample them. Some were complicated. A web of offers and assurances, of polite fictions that would become true by being spoken enough times by the right lips. Renly's hand appeared where it ought, absent where it would have made a hard promise into a threat. Marjorie's signature appeared nowhere and was present everywhere, in the tone and in the way the ink dried. When the first answer came from the North, not from Robb, who had already left Winterfell with the heart of the North at his back, but from a bannerman who had counted the cost and found it heavy, Sansa read it and knew the man, not by name but by the shape of his pride. He thanked her for her safety and for her courage and for her letter and for the assurance that no letter from King's Landing was hers, and then he asked, in a line at the bottom that looked like an afterthought and cost him ammo, "Re then the rest, for a piece of news that would make him sleep at night even if the day had been hard. Her father's health." Sansa wrote back with truth that did not wound. "He lives. He has courage enough to fill the cell he sits in. He will live if living is the bridge between two necessary things." At dusk one day, as the air considered whether to cool or to keep being pleasant and decided to cool just enough to make the wine taste better, a courier came with a sealed letter from Storm's End. This wax showed a stag in full spring. Renly read it and let out a breath between his teeth and then handed it to Willis and then to Mace and then to Olenna. Marjorie read it over her grandmother's shoulder without asking. Sansa watched the ripples pass through the group and knew, before anyone spoke, that the letter contained a kind of heat. "Stannis," Renly said, and made the name sound like a stone placed on a table. "He has written a treatise, with proofs, and an announcement that he is the king." "Did he sign it the king?" Olenna asked dryly. "He did," Renly said, not smiling. "He says the queen's children are not the king's, that the council is complicit, that the realm is in sin. He wants me to bend." He looked at Sansa as if some part of him wanted to see whether her face would change at the content of the letter. It did not in the way he might have expected. Her face changed in a different way. It grew, in that small steady place under her sternum, quieter. "He is not wrong," she said, the words tasting like iron. "About the queen's children." "No," Renly said. "He is not." He turned the letter over in his hands as if it were a crab that might pinch if handled incautiously. "He will be right until being right makes no difference to the number of men who will follow him. He has a fortress and a fleet. He has no friends. He has a truth, and truths are stubborn," Willis said mildly. "Truth is a blade with no hilt," Olenna said. "Men cut their hands trying to wield it. Better to use a cudgel that does not slip." She looked at Renly. "You intend to be a cudgel, or a loaf?" "I intend," Renly said, and then he allowed himself to say it with his whole mouth, "to be king." He expected the air to change when he said it. It did not much. The bees kept their opinions. A far-off fountain continued its argument with gravity. Loras, who had been standing very still in the opposite light as if expecting this scene and rehearsing his role in it, exhaled and smiled as if someone had chosen the right card from a deck at last. Mace began to puff up and then, at a small bird-like gesture from Olenna, deflated gently and turned his puff into a sober nod. "The Reach likes a king it can see and touch," he said. "A king who will come to harvest feasts and sit a horse that is not afraid of bread carts. A king who will keep Tolliver's boy from marrying the girl he should not and save us the trouble of telling her father why the boy is no good. Stannis will make men stand in lines. They will fall over eventually and he will tell them to stand again. They will. Until they do not, we can make bread. Is bread enough? Bread and a shield, Renly said. He put his hand, without fuss, on Sansa's shoulder and let it rest there as lightly as a petition. And those who belong to us kept safe, and a way for the North to say yes without making their gods blush. He did not look at Willis as he said it. He did not need to. Olenna sniffed. Then you will need a wedding, she said. You always do. Men will go to war on an empty stomach if they believe there will be a feast to end it. Give them a marriage to dance at and they will begin to imagine grandchildren. That softens them. Her eyes slid to Sansa. Not yours yet, she added. You need not look as if I have dragged you into a kitchen and told you to gut a fish. Renly needs a Tyrell first. We will dress my granddaughter up and get her a pretty crown and let the singers compare her to whatever plants they like. Then, when the songs are done, we will see where to put you. I am not a piece of furniture, Sansa said, not loudly but very clearly. Olenna's mouth twitched, and it was the kind of twitch that could be mistaken for cruelty by those who had never been allowed to own a tongue. Child, none of us are, she said. We are the hands that move the furniture and the eyes that decide where it looks best. It is only the men who think they are the houses. She squeezed Sansa's fingers with her old dry hand. You will tell me when I forget you have a mind. It happens to old women. We see what we need and we forget it is not the whole picture. Do not let me be lazy. Sansa did not promise to be brave. She was very tired of promising to be brave. She promised to be present. I will tell you, she said, and she meant it. She would use the voice Willis had taught her to recognize by telling her it made the air sit up and listen. That night, Sansa dreamed again of Winterfell. Only Winterfell had grown vines up its walls, and the snow that fell in the gods would smelled of time when it melted on her wrist. She woke to the sound of a lute being tuned somewhere down a corridor and the faint spill of laughter that told her the garden had not finished its day yet. She lay in the dark a long time, not afraid, exactly, but aware of how many endings and beginnings sat together in this place and how their edges rubbed. She thought of Arya. She thought of father. She thought of a girl who had looked into the dark and seen a skiff cut away from a quay and had not screamed. In King's Landing, Arya Stark sat on a ledge in a place that had once been a piece of wall and now was a shadow and ate a heel of stolen bread with her teeth and decided she would never again allow anyone to tell her a story about princes that did not include mud. She was not thinking of Sansa in the way people mean when they say thinking. She was living in a way that would make remembering Sansa later easier because she was learning to tell the truth to herself without the lecture of fear. She moved as a cat would move across a roof, not to be seen, and if a man called to her, she did not answer. She had Sirio's voice in her head. Not even a voice, a rhythm, and when men banged down a door and breathed heavy and cursed at nothing, she was already on the next roof, and the next. If someone had told her that her sister was in a garden where bees worked and old women sharpened their tongues, Arya would have said, good. Let Sansa make the world behave while I learn to make a blade listen. News grew leaves and then fruit. Renly stood before a quiet court under a pavilion made of blue silk and told men what they already knew he would tell them. And when he called for banners, enough came that even a cautious man would have called it a forest. Marjorie stood at his side and looked like a promise that the realm would not be ugly if it did not want to be. Sansa stood back where a young lady stands and watched how men made vows and how women made the words of those vows into something that could feed a village. She learned the names of Reach Lords she had not known. Fossaway of New Barrel and Fossaway of Cider Hall, and how a quarrel between them had given the Reach 2 apple sigils that had taken generations to learn not to feel foolish about. Rowan and Tarly and Oakhart and Florent. She watched Lord Randall Tarly's face and recognized a particular kind of hard that the North had taught her how to respect without courting. She learned how to nod without spending her whole neck on the gesture. After, when the pavilion had emptied, when Mace had gone to count men and Olenna to count loaves, Renly came to Sansa where she sat with her needlework and did not pretend to look at the embroidery. There will be ugliness, he said. We will do what we can to keep you out of the worst of it. When it comes, you may decide to stay or you may decide to go further south to Old Town, where the Citadel will take you in and teach you things that are not sharp. If you choose to stay, I will not apologize when the ugliness arrives. I will only hope it does not touch you. He paused. Your father, Varys, tells me he will live if he speaks words he hates. He will speak them. He has chosen to live. Sansa's hands went still on the cloth. She thought of the way words had felt in her mouth in the throne room, before she knew which words cost what. She thought of father's eyes. He will speak them for us, she said. Yes, Renly said. He sat, which was unlike him in halls. Renly liked to be on his feet among people, to be a lantern that could be carried to where light was needed. And in return, the boy will spare him and then find a way to kill him later in a way that allows him to pretend he did not break his promise. That is how Cersei teaches him to count. Or, he added, and Sansa heard the way the word weighed, or the boy will forget, and the forgetting will be worse than a lie, and we will have work to do from a place of grief rather than strategy. Sansa thought for a long moment, and then she put down her needle and let the thread lie as if it had found a place to rest. If it is grief, she said quietly, I will not be undone by it. I will be busy. Renly looked at her with a respect that had nothing to do with the way men look at pretty girls and everything to do with the way it feels to watch a bridge stand after a flood. You will, he said. You will be very busy. The day that news came, it did not arrive as a single blow. It came with two ravens that arrived within an hour of each other, one bearing a careful letter in a hand Sansa knew, Maester Pycelle's pompous obedient script, and the other in a hand that looked almost like a man had tried to write while the sea moved under him. The first said the words as if they were inevitable and decent. Confession, mercy, the wall, the boy king's magnanimity. The second was 3 lines. The mob, the steps, the sword, the way names sound when shouted by men who are not listening to themselves. Renly read them both and sat very still, as if he had set himself a penance not to move until the world made sense again. Margaery read them and covered her mouth with her fingers, and then took her hand down and stood with her spine so straight that the air beside her seemed to have straightened itself by imitation. Willis read them and looked at Sansa as if to see whether the bird he had taught to land on his arm had learned to return to a different hand now that the wind had changed. Olenna read them and did not blink. She said, "Ah," as if she had just set a pie on the table and, cutting into it, had discovered that the filling had leaked and the crust had still somehow managed to hold a decent shape. Mace read them and cried and did not try to hide it, and in that moment Sansa liked him better than she had. Sansa did not faint. She did not scream. She did not throw the letter. She placed it on the table as if it were a piece of hot iron, and she would not be the lady who threw hot irons at people who loved her. She walked out into the garden that smelled of thyme and of water and of the faint sweetness of something that had fallen from a tree and begun to go to sugar. She stood by the fountain and did not look into it. She thought of the first time her father had put his hand on her shoulder and told her that the world was not obligated to love her because she loved it, and that this knowledge would either make her bitter or make her truthful. She did not choose bitterness. She chose to be busy. She returned to the Solar without any of the household having had time to compose a speech for her and said to Willis, "I will need to write a letter to my brother, not telling him to bend, not telling him to rise, telling him how our father died and what lies the city will tell about it and which of those lies will be believed no matter what we say. So he must move as if they are true even though they are not." Willis nodded like a man who has been told what work he will be doing that day and is pleased to have his hands occupied. "What else?" he asked. Sansa looked at Renly. "You will be king," she said. It was not a question. "And you will not be my king at once. But you will not be the man who looks away when men begin to make jokes out of our grief. You will take our grief and do something with it. If you ask me to stand beside your queen as a promise that your bread will feed the north as well as the south, I will do it. If you ask me to go to Old Town to be quiet and wait, I will go and be quiet and wait. But I will be busy. I will not let this death be only a story told by men who like the sound of a blade." Renly stood and crossed the room and put his hands around Sansa's as if she were a sword he meant to take up and use well. He had the sense not to kneel. "You have my word," he said. "I will break no promise I make in the presence of your father's name." Olenna snorted, because sentiment makes old women itchy, and then came and cupped Sansa's cheek with a hand that surprised them both by being gentle. "We will make the world where you can be useful and not only lovely, she said. "It will be a smaller world than you deserve. They always are, but it will be yours, and we will test any man who thinks to take it from you." Marjorie's arm slipped around Sansa then without ceremony. The two girls leaned their foreheads together, and it was not a childish gesture. It was a way to share weight. Loras stood near them and looked at the floor because men like him know when to look away and give a moment privacy. Willis looked at the papers and began to place them in an order that would make sense to someone who had never seen them before. Mace rubbed his eyes and then, surprising everyone including himself, said, "If there is a thing to be done, say so," and waited to be told. They were very busy. Sansa wrote letters in a hand that had learned steadiness. Letters that said truth where it would do good and withheld it where it would not. Letters that refused to tell men what they longed to be told and instead told them what they needed to know. She wore black that was cut so it did not make her look like a girl playing at a widow. She wore no flowers. She went to the sept and did not ask the mother for anything but strength enough to stand when she wished to lie down. She went to the hawks and let the weight of a creature that exists only in the present remind her how to breathe when the present is terrible. She sat with Olenna and learned how rumors are planted like bulbs and how they bloom months later in another garden and make people believe they have always grown there. When Renly married Marjorie, the Reach behaved as if it had expected the sun to do this. There were garlands that looked careless because 12 people had been careful with them. There was music that sounded as if someone had decided to play the smell of baked bread. Sansa stood where a guest stands who is also a piece of a larger plan and wore a gown the color of watered wine because anything darker would have made her look like an accusation and anything brighter would have made her look like a girl with no right to her own sorrow. She watched the way Renly's face softened when he looked at Marjorie and the way Marjorie's face softened when she looked at the people and understood, with a clarity that felt like a window being opened, that this marriage was a thing made not only of two people but of 1,000 vows held together with the smallest stitches. After, at the feast, a singer tried to make a jest about wolves in rose gardens and found his tongue thick in his mouth as if the wine had turned. No one had told it to. Sometimes people love a girl enough to make the air refuse to carry cruelty. When the candles had burned down to a certain height that only women notice, because they are the ones who notice how much light is left and how much longer the room can afford to keep pretending not to be night. Sansa went out alone to the balcony where the vines made their soft net. The sky above the manor was a deep blue that would be black soon. The garden hummed with bees finishing their last considerations. The river went on making its small argument with itself over stones. Sansa stood there and did not make a speech in her head about vengeance. She did not write a poem about woe. She did not promise her father that she would become a blade. She had been promised 1,000 things by men and women who had good intentions and poor follow-through, and she found, to her own surprise, that the only promise she wanted to make was to herself and was small enough to fit in her mouth without breaking it. "I will be useful," she thought. "I will be kind on purpose. I will not be a weapon in someone else's hand unless I have first decided that the cut is mine to make." The words did not make the night warm. They did not make the world fair. They were not magic. They were a knot tied with a competence Beldegar would have respected, that bit and held. In the morning, when she rose, the letters would begin again. Men would ride out and men would ride in. Loras would drill in the yards and come in red-cheeked and brimming as if summer had drunk him. Renly would hold court and make bread out of noise and slice it into pieces men could eat. Olenna would sharpen her shears. Marjorie would listen to women and tell them truths about their sons that made them go home more content than any lie could manage. Willis would feed his hawks. The bees would work. The river would keep speaking. And somewhere north where the map's lines turn more stern and the air smells of iron, a boy with his father's eyes would read a letter in his sister's hand and see in it the shape of a road he might walk that did not lead only to ruin. He would fold the letter carefully and tuck it in a place he had learned to keep musty and safe. He would say nothing aloud. He would call men to him and ask them for their names and count how many sons they had and how many more they could afford to lose, and he would keep the number in his heart like a thorn to remind him not to be a fool. Sansa lifted her face to the dawn as it came, unhurried and inevitable, and let it touch her skin. The day did not care what small human plans filled it. It would be day regardless. That oddly felt like mercy. She turned and went where the work was. Highgarden breathed around her. The world made itself again.